welcome to another episode of Inkwell Spoken Presents Common Genius, Uncommon Destiny. I am your host, Reggie Key, and today my special guest with me is Woodie Green. Woodie, welcome to the show.
Reggie, thank you for having me. I'm extremely excited to be here and join you in this session, and just really looking forward to what's to come in this dialogue.
Yeah, me too, man. It's been a while since we've kind of seen each other face to face, so to speak, right? It's been a couple of years.
It has been a couple of years. I think I left Illinois, moved to Ohio probably around 5 years ago. So even before that, we were hanging out as family and friends, and life happens, and you take kind of different paths, but it's always good to catch up with really good people like yourself and reconnect.
Likewise, I like that. We make these connections, we discover new friendships, we discover commonalities with people, and those commonalities, if they're true and tried, you can still reconnect even when, like you said, our lives kind of become divergent and we go in different ways. I mean, you left Illinois 5 years ago. I left Illinois last year, within the past year, and yet and still, because we had that connection and we still have friends that we share in common, we're able to reconnect. So having said that, can you just go into like, when did we meet and how? You remember?
Yeah, I do. So my wife and I, this is 2022 now, right? So my wife and I, we've just recently celebrated another anniversary, and we've known each other for you and also my wife for a very long time. And I met my wife at church.
Yep.
And through my wife, she introduced me, of course, to her family, church family, and you and your wife were a part of that family. So, during that time, we certainly connected more and more and spent time together. So our connection was, through my wife and through the church, which is just simply amazing.
Yeah, what's funny, man? So I'm pretty sure when we met, we were still within the age bracket of the young adult group that was at the church.
That is
18 to
correct.
35. And it
Yeah.
seemed so, the age range seemed so vast that I was like, man, I'm gonna be in this thing forever. But now I'm finding myself almost 10 years removed from that age bracket. So that's a little sobering.
Yeah, it is. Every day that goes past and every year that goes past, I always look back and it's like, wow, it's been quite the journey.
Yeah, but it's a blessing, especially for us as African American males, to be able to get an extra year on the belt, to prove that we have functionality, that we can whatever people say is our lifespan, whatever, we can continue to defy that. We can continue to set a new mindset as far as what it means to be an African American male in this country, and what it means to be successful, and so what it means to connect with others that are successful. So again, it's definitely good to reconnect with you in this season.
Likewise.
And so I wanted to get right into the crux of why I'm having you on the show. I've written a book. It's called Common Genius, Uncommon Destiny. And what I wanted to bring to people is this notion that there's something that's on the inside of you that you may already be tapping into, or that you have yet to tap into, that connects you to genius. And so very simply, I'm going to walk us through the equation that I have for genius that's outlined in my books and my workshops. And that equation, I'll refer to it a couple of times. It's your passion plus your talent plus your purpose. But the whole thing begins with this one question, like, do you see yourself as being a genius? So Woody, that's the question that I start with you. Are you a genius?
Reggie, that's a very interesting and dynamic question, because I don't know. I'm going to answer that question in three ways, if that's okay.
That's perfectly fine.
Yeah. So I would say that let's look at how I kind of see it now. I would say that no, I never looked at myself as a genius. The older I got, the more I really didn't think about it that way, right?
Mhm.
And I'm going to answer the question three ways based on how you ask the question. So no, I did not think of myself that way. If I go back and think about, when I was in my 20s and early 30s, I I had a fire in me
Hmm. Okay.
that I really couldn't describe, but I felt that I was special,
Hmm.
right? Right. And then if I look at, my adolescent years and teenage years, there was kind of this uncertainty around myself, right? Um, Spiritually, mentally, within my heart, that I was destined for something,
Hmm.
right? And through all those three different stages, I guess it's kind of a maturation process
Yes.
where you start to understand what your calling is or what your destiny is, or I don't know if you use the word genius, but really what your natural talents are. So so that's the way I kind of think about the question that you're asking. And but no, I never thought of myself as a genius per se.
Okay. I like some of the things that I heard you say. You mentioned that there was this uncertainty that you had either as a young adult or an adolescent, and then there was this destiny that you could feel like you had to tap into, which we all have. We are all put on this planet to do something that is extraordinary. Even if it doesn't reach to the other end of the globe, there's something that we can do locally. There's something that we can do within our community that changes it for the better, and that is the essence of what genius is. And so the job that we have now that we're out of this young adult age bracket is the knowledge that we've gained, the understanding that we have. Our responsibility is to then give it back to the generation that's behind us so that they have a chance to begin to process this information at a younger age and then begin to get rid of that uncertainty sooner than some of us did.
Yeah, yeah,
Right. And so that's what my goal has been. That's what one of my purposes is, I believe, that's connected to my genius, right? And so it's not unnatural for the person who I'm talking to say, no, I've never ascribed genius to myself. But I bet if I asked you to think of someone, or to say, like, if I changed the question and said, who's the first person that comes to mind when you think of the word genius, I feel like you would have an instant response for me. So that becomes my second question. Who comes to
yeah.
mind when you think of this word?
Um, I was gonna say Kanye West, but
He
I
just came out with
will
that
say
series, right?
yeah, exactly, exactly. Hopefully that gets a few chuckles from folks who are watching, but probably Leonardo da Vinci is someone I would put in that category. And um, there's a host of different people, Martin Luther King,
Hmm.
Bill
Hmm.
Gates, and probably Einstein as well,
Hmm.
are folks that I would put in that category of being geniuses.
Yes. And so I like the word that you used, category, because genius is very much about categories. But what we tend to do is we tend to think that this genius category is limited. And in fact, it's limitless. As often and as many people as I encounter, I'm encountering different categories of genius, and it's my job to help you see your category, to see your lane. And so one of the last names that you mentioned was Einstein, and Einstein purportedly has this saying where he said, "Hey, look, if you judge a fish by how well it can climb a tree, it'll spend its entire life thinking it's stupid."
Hmm. Yeah.
Right? And the tree is the category of genius, right? The tree is a category meant for things like bears and animals that are land dwellers that have claws that can climb trees easily. But if a fish begins to be judged by its ability to be a genius in this category, it's going to think it's stupid, because that's not where it's meant to be. That's not where it's meant to be. What's the word that I want to say? It's not meant, that's not where it's meant to be analyzed for its genius, right? Because
Mhm.
fish don't belong on land, they belong in
And water, of course.
water. right? That's
Yeah.
their element, that's their lane. And so if you want to judge a fish by its capacity to reach its most, to reach its greatest potential, you got to make sure that you put it in its element. If you keep this fish on land trying to tell it that it needs to climb this tree, it's going to die.
Yeah.
It's going to be out of its lane and it's never going to get to that full functionality. And I want to bring life to people through understanding, like, hey, you may be analyzing yourself first and foremost by comparing yourself to a Leonardo da Vinci. Y'all not in the same lane. If you don't have the same, if you don't tap into the universe the same way as Leonardo da Vinci, does that mean that you automatically should discredit yourself from being labeled as a genius? No. He was a certain type. Einstein was a certain type. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was a genius orator, right? You might not be the person who's supposed to get up in front of people and do speeches, but you might be the person that's behind the stage coaching Dr. King and coaching and getting the platform developed for him to be able to arise and ascend and do what he was able to do. And so if people keep discounting the contributions that they have for society in society, they may in fact be limiting someone else's genius from being able to reach the masses. So everybody has a role to play. And it begins with just as readily as, you respond when I say, hey, Woody, you like, hey, what's going on? You can respond to your name. I want to get you in the masses to be able to respond to, what, when someone says genius, I'm gonna look up and say, yes, I have something of value to offer.
Got it. So let me ask you a question, if you don't mind.
Hey,
as I'm writing down notes here, and as you kind of talked about, there's a lot of times where folks are out of their element, right?
mm-hmm.
And there's a label that's put on them around they're not smart, or their talents or their expertise may be discounted. What do you say to somebody who kind of goes through that, where they absorb and hold that burden of being discounted, right? Not of value.
Yeah.
What do you say to folks that may experience that?
So I encounter people like that often because of these workshops. And one particular encounter comes to mind specifically, and I was given the opportunity to talk to some third, fourth, and fifth graders at an elementary school in Illinois. And they definitely had labels put on them. They had labels. They were all they were all minorities except for maybe like one. They were all boys. And these third, fourth, and fifth graders were all put into the same class, one class for the entire school day after day, week after week, month after month, because they were identified as, hey, look, you have a learning disability. Hey, look, you have emotional disorder. Hey, look, you have ADHD. Hey, look, you have ADD. All these labels that were put on them to make the school system function the way it needed to function, as opposed to trying to figure out how they fit in, what type of teaching they needed, what type of learning style they had. They were just marginalized and told, hey, look, you know what? We're just going to push you off to the side. And so, of course, when they're in this classroom together, they're just wilding. They're like wilding out. And I come in there and I try to talk to them and encourage them. And instead of trying to figure out what it is that I can say to them, I just like posing questions to try and get them to talk to me. And so the question that I asked them is the next question that I would ask you. I would say, hey, tell me what you hate. And this instantly does not, if you ask them something like, well, what do you feel like you're destined to do? What is your purpose in life? Whether it's a third, fourth, fifth grader, or even a senior that's about to go into college, they might look at you for a minute like, yeah, that's a little heavy. I don't know. Right. Yeah. And my goal is not to get people to stop talking, it's to get them to begin to do self-exploration by talking. And so I know that with young kids, adolescents, preteens, teenagers, young adults, I'm like, hey, tell me what you hate though. And then I get into this, I just let them talk. And so when I asked them this question, they became super engaged with me. And they told me universally, these young men who could never really agree on anything, they fought with each other day after day, they all universally threw this curveball at me. At least they thought it was a curveball. And they said, we hate school, Mr. King.
Wow.
And it was like, now, and they just kind of looked at me like, what you going to do with that?
Yeah.
And so I said, I'm very glad that you said that, because then that opens the lane for me to then go to the next place that we're going to go to, which is to say,
Yeah.
hey, look, I understand why you hate school. School is making you feel, school is putting these labels on you, to use your
Yeah.
word. School is making you feel like you're dumb, right? The fish that spends its whole life thinking it's stupid because it's been mislabeled, right?
Yeah.
And so I said, okay, I'm not, the reaction that they think I'm gonna have is, hey, don't say that. Like you gotta like school. No, I can understand, I can empathize with why you would not like school, seeing the environment that you're in every day, seeing how it's making you feel every day,
Right.
understanding that you have a learning style that's specific to you that they're not teaching in the classroom. So the
Yeah.
information is lost, it's lost in translation. You're not picking it up. And it's not
Right.
because something's wrong with you, it's actually because there's something wrong with the system that you've been put in. And
Mhm.
so just letting them talk, it makes them want to talk more. So now they're like, well, what am I supposed to do with that? And I'm like, well, hey, look, let's look at the thing that you hate and analyze it from a different perspective. The thing that you hate, we've talked about why you hate it. Now understand that you were actually purposed, you were put into this position to do something about it. And so the thing that you hate in this world, and some people have multiple things that they hate, the thing that you hate in this world because it impacts you in a negative way, it impacts the people that you love in a negative way, is the thing that you were actually purposed to fix.
Yeah. Wow. That's pretty powerful. Pretty
Yeah.
powerful. Yeah. Yeah.
Like
I want to
it's
go.
go ahead.
Yeah. I want to go back to the point around, um, you know, some of the responses around what students may hate, and being in school. I did some mentoring here in Ohio, certainly in Illinois, and also in Michigan, Indianapolis, pretty much everywhere I've lived. I lived a lot of places across North America, residence wise.
Mhm.
And when I did mentoring, that seems to be, and most of the mentoring was in schools, right, academic setting, and that was a common theme, right. And what
Yeah.
I found, and I always think about myself and the folks I grew up with as well, is that there are different styles of learning, right? There's folks that can comprehend the linear kind of academic style
That's
of,
logical.
yeah, logical and reading and comprehension and regurgitation of information. And then
Mhm.
there's others that learn based on application,
Yep.
right?
Put my hands
Yeah,
on it.
the sensory, like touching, seeing, doing, goes a long way. And I always got asked this question: is how did you do in school? And I did fairly well in school, right?
Mhm.
I think I'm a good balance of both. But where I excel is when I can take a algebra problem or a geometry problem or a calculus problem or science experiment, whatever it may be, and apply it to the real world. So I had
Yeah.
to trick, I had to use the word trick, but I had to trick my brain into answering the question, why is this
Why?
important?
Mhm.
So once I understood why it was important, then it made it easier for me to digest, dissect, and produce an output, right, at the end of the day, to do the work, right.
Yeah.
So it's interesting because when you think about classrooms, when I was in school, we it was like 30 was probably the average classroom size. 35 is like, oh yeah, that's a lot of folks. And when you're
All
in
right.
public school systems, 35 teetering on 40, that's a lot. That's a pretty big student to teacher ratio. And a lot of times is there's so many students and they all have different needs. It's not just the academic and application. It could be the academic, a person that does academic and application, a person that does academic alone, and a person that does application alone. And it is sometimes unfair that classroom sizes are so large and the approach to teaching styles are different.
Mhm.
And how do we meet our children where they're at? That's the question that I always have around
Yeah.
the educational system at the end of the day. But but I digress. I just wanted to kind of
No,
share
you don't
that.
digress at all. This goes right hand in hand with where I'm about to go. So before I go to this place that you completely just lobbed it in the air for me to slam dunk it. You know,
Okay,
All-Star game was last night. Uh,
absolutely.
but let me go back to your point. You're saying, hey, look, some people are logical thinkers. Other people need to know, like, why is this important? How do I apply this in my everyday life in a way that I actually care about? Because yeah, just seeing some numbers and shapes on the board, some people don't care about that. I
Mhm.
was good at math too, so I wasn't one of those. I loved math. Math was a language. Math literally was me speaking my language, or the teacher
Right,
speaking my language to me. But like you said, if you have 30 students, somebody is going to fall through the cracks because that's not the language that they speak. And so a good example of that is, hey, look, I'll ask when my kids were younger, or if I'm helping, tutor some kids outside of my house, I'll say something like, hey, this problem says what's 100 divided by 4? And they'll look at me like, I don't know. But I say, hey, if you got, if I ask them about money though, and I say, hey, look, if you got like $1
yeah,
and I need to get like a fourth of that, like, what is that, 25 cents? Like,
right,
they know that right away because it's
right,
important to them. Money is important to them.
yeah,
Objects are helping them grasp this concept. They've attributed 25 cent, a quarter, a literal quarter, to this object that is a part of another object for as long as they can remember. And so they get that. But when you take away, when you leave it abstract and just say, yeah, divide 100 by 25, 100 by 4, they're looking at you like, why am I doing this? Like, I don't understand
right.
the importance of this. I was watching Abbott Elementary. Are you watching this new show that came on this season?
My wife is watching it now. I've caught a couple episodes. Yeah, it's
You should
really
catch
good.
you should go back to the last episode from last week. I think it was. There's a substitute teacher there that's becoming a recurring character, and he's very by the books. And so he was like, I can't get these kids. He was asking them something simple like, what's 13 minus 6? And they were struggling. I mean, they're like second grade. They're just learning the rudimentary
Yeah,
skills of adding and subtracting. And he's like, I don't understand why when I ask this question, they're asking me like, well, why are there 13 apples or whatever it is? And he's like, that's not important. Just get 13 divided by, minus 6. And the teacher, who's a little more seasoned than he is, he's like, hey, it was a she actually. She was like, she said, until you address the student's question, like you're not going to be able to reach them. Like, don't think of the student's question like, why are there 13 apples? Why are we taking away 7? She was like, you got to address that first. So that because until you address that, they're gonna be stuck on, I don't understand why it's so many this object and why we subtracted so many. And so once he kind of understood that towards the end of the episode, I guess should have been a spoiler alert, but towards the end of the episode, he allows and entertains the question to be answered, and the young person then gets the answer, right? And so it's this idea of, hey, look, what's logical to you is illogical to someone else. Don't try to convince them that they got to be logically thinking the way you're teaching, but incorporate their learning style once you see what it is into the lesson. And I get it. It can be difficult to do that in a public school system where the student to teacher ratio is so big. But that's what gets me to the solution. So I'm talking to these kids, Woody, and I'm like, all right, if you're picking up what I'm putting down and you understand that the thing that you hate is something that's broken in the world that you were meant to fix, then when you tell me that you hate school, what you're telling me is you're a future educator. And the teachers are always like, oh, snap. Like they just kind of look back and take a step back. And the kids, like, they get real like, oh, that's not how I thought this was going to go.
yeah,
Because they in their mind, they're ready to run away from the problem, to run away from the system that's making them feel less than. And what I'm actually telling them is you need to run towards it and understand that you have something that can be plugged into it that's going to help fix it. If they continue to allow themselves to be marginalized, then they're continuing to allow the problem to exist because you're marginalizing an entire generation of future teachers with different learning styles that when they go into the system with their learning styles, they become teaching styles that were absent.
yeah,
And now that teaching style is reaching others who have the same learning style so that the system is being supplemented with what was missing before.
right.
And so this is an important pattern that we have to break. It's very evident in the school system, but it's also evident in corporate America. It's also evident in community work. It's also evident in government. Government is not working how it ought to. And it's because people keep doing the same things and trying to acquiesce their skills, their talents to what's being propagated into a system that's not functioning like it ought to.
Right.
And so what's your response to that? I'm gonna give you a chance to.
You know, I agree. We live in an imperfect world, right? And I think that a lot of us, and it's tough. It's tough. It is tough. It is not easy. Every day is not easy, no matter what scenario you look at. And I think a lot of times is certainly, you know, in my role in business and certainly in school, it's about how do you move the majority at the end of the day. And if you can move the majority, a statistically significant portion, then a lot of folks, a lot of institutions, organizations, they look at that as success.
Yeah.
But one piece that is always missing when you move the majority, there's always the minority or the small portion that are not moving at the same pace, right, as the masses.
Right.
And
that's
what happens, yeah, there's a cost to it, right? And the cost, and we're seeing this kind of playing out, and this is you know, something I really care about. And you've asked me a number of questions around, you know, what I dislike or what I hate, and I'll answer that at some point. But you know, when that happens, is you create these larger margins and larger gaps, educational gap, wealth gap, a currency gap, whatever it may be. You start creating a lot of gaps because you're constantly moving the majority further and further and further. And at no point in time is anyone, to your point, kind of supplementing to help move the others based on how they learn or how they engage or how they teach or how they address the issues of constituents, right? That gap continues to get bigger and bigger, and it's wider and wider. So I agree with you on that. I agree with you.
All right. So yeah, we are of one mind. This is why we talking right now. Not one mind necessarily, but you know, we see the same problem. So
correct.
Now I'm going to give you your chance to get into, like, what is it that you hate?
Yeah. So coconuts is automatically the number one thing that's on my list.
It's on mine too, man.
No, absolutely,
dry coconuts are the worst.
Yeah, it's the worst. Anything coconut flavor is like, that's the worst. So I don't really have a solution for that. I think that's just a personal preference.
Hey, hold on, pause though. Pause. I love those responses because you're the first adult that I've interviewed one-on-one that's given that type of response. But that's the type of stuff that kids will give me, and I'm like, it's funny. I'm like, you know, it's not meant to be so serious. I'm like, you know, people was saying stuff like clowns, right? And all manner of stuff, and I'm like, I don't know how you're gonna solve clowns and spiders and coconuts, but you know, it's I like that because it shows that there's a response and there's an engagement, and that's that creativity. I love it. So I just want to say, like, I appreciate that.
Oh yeah, no problem. So I'll answer this question by kind of sharing my personal story.
All right.
And I have a lot of stories, but this one in particular. So I grew up in Detroit, Michigan. Okay. My family was certainly, I mean, we were poor at the end of the day, right? We were poor. We were certainly making ends meet and striving to be the best we could possibly be, right? And have fun and love each other at the same time, right? That was it, right? My dad owned his own business for the longest period of time, right? And he had a very good business. He employed a lot of folks. And when you're younger, you observe a lot of different things through your childhood, right? Both positive and challenges. And the one thing that I observed, there's a couple things I observed. My father certainly worked really hard at the end of the day. My dad never graduated from high school, right? He hustled, right? He hustled, he worked, he formed a business, he had his clientele, he had different products and services that he offered. But the one thing that was a challenge for him, and certainly the community that was around him as well, is that his financial literacy was very limited, right? And I worked for my dad at a very young age. I used to go out with him, me and my brother and my sister, and we would work, wake up early on the weekends when we didn't have school, and we would go out with him and visit with his clients and have meetings and do some of the work as well through the process. And certainly had calluses at a young age, and that's certainly scars and wounds and things that I carry with me to this day. It just taught me more around hard work. But when it seems like when he always got to a point of being a small business and potential to kind of grow, there was always these limits, right? At the end of the day, limits around resources, limits around tangible assets as far as like vehicles or facility, access to capital, those type of things. There were limits, and certainly could have figured it out. He could have figured it out, but it was a challenge, right? At the end of the day. So when I see that, when I experience that, and I see that today, and we talked about limitless, right? There's so much opportunity out there for a lot of folks that may just not have access, right? Yeah. Access is the key word to me. It could be access in education, access in resources, knowledge, network. Just access is what I dislike the most, and it goes back to that. One thing we were talking about is moving the majority. The majority may have access, but some of the minority, right, the others, may not have that access. So that's the one thing that that I dislike the most.
Yeah, I can tell you're a little uncomfortable saying, "Hey, I know that's a strong word, but I use that because for the demographic that I'm used to talking to, I know that I can get a response from that, and it's cool. Whether you say dislike or hate, whatever, is something that gets your attention, because most of the time it got your attention when you were younger and made you feel a certain way or made your loved ones feel a certain way. So that even you mentioned these calluses, and I was thinking to myself, is he talking about like physical calluses or emotional and social calluses? And I think it's all three.
It is all three.
You still carry with you. Yeah, you still carrying with you. Like when you see it, when you bump it, you know how a callus work. You're getting old and you get these little corns on your feet. When you bump that joke, you can just rub it. And you're like, ow, what was that? Like, what did I do? Right. And so the social and emotional calluses that we carry from our childhood begin to gain our focus when we get older, and we're like, man, this ain't right. Like I don't like feeling this. I remember what this felt like back in the day. And if you're anyone who cares about other people, it's not just about you. Genius is never just about you. It starts off that way, but then it turns outward and says, who else do I see with these calluses? Who else do I see impacted the way I know my family was impacted? These gaps that you talked about, because the cost of pushing aside the minority for the majority begins to weigh down the entire system. And the system is not being allowed to calibrate and adjust for that by bringing the minority into the majority. And this has, huge socioeconomic, impact and just ramifications and all that, which I'm sure that I can tell that you're one who sees those type of things and weighs those type of things and is constantly trying to figure out like, what do I do about that? And
Right.
you know, the word that you mentioned was access, but many years ago when I first started doing these workshops, the word that I would use was exposure, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when I remember being a young kid and being deemed the smart one, being deemed the genius academically. Now let me pause for a second. Academic genius, that's based off of GPA and IQ. That's just one type. Just
Right.
because your GPA wasn't high, just because you didn't finish high school, whatever, does not mean that you don't have genius. Your genius is just going to be nurtured from a realm outside of academia, and that's fine, right? And so I remember this is a random story, but I think it makes the point really clear. I got stories too. So
Yeah.
my parents at one point in time got this doorbell, and it had different chimes. Like it had different, you could program it so that when you hit the doorbell, it would ring a little tune, right? Tunes, and they had 26 different tunes, because I remember they were tunes A through Z. Different tunes for like Christmas and New Year's and whatever, just random stuff. And I thought this was the coolest thing when I was a kid. I was in elementary school, but nobody else like really cared. Like my sister, who was taller than me, wouldn't try to fix it. And this thing was like all up at the top of the top of the wall. Nobody else would change it when the holidays came, except me. I would go, grab a chair, drag it over, get on top of the chair, and I would just go through and listen to the different tunes and be like, I want to use this one. So I
Mm-hmm.
remember one particular year, it was like Christmas, New Year's. So I put it on Christmas. And then I remember going through and I put it on this one setting, and it was called Auld Lang Syne. And I'm like, what is that? I've never heard of that. So I hit the button, and you know what played? It was the New Year's song. Should
Okay.
all acquaintance, I'm not going to go into the singing the whole, but you know the tune, right? So I was like, oh, that's what that's called. I know that song. Get to school after the holidays, and we were playing some trivia game, right? And one of the trivia was, what song is sang for New Year's? And I looked around, nobody said anything, and I was like, Auld Lang Syne. And the kids was like, what is this? Who is this dude? Like,
Yeah.
who knows this?
Right.
And they were quick to ascribe to me. They were like, you're a genius. And I
Mm-hmm.
don't think they used that word, but that's essentially that's what they were saying. And I said,
Yeah.
nah. I said, no, don't. Even as an elementary school kid, Woody, I promise you I did this. I was like, don't call me that, because the only reason why I know is because I had this doorbell at my house.
Yeah. Yeah.
Exposure.
Right.
It's all
Right.
about exposure. I'm like, if everyone had this doorbell in their house and everybody explored it the way I explored it, everybody would know that Auld Lang Syne is the name of the New Year song. It wouldn't, it's
Yeah.
that,
Yeah. And
and
there's another element in this too, as you talk about the exposure. Excuse me. Pardon me. So with exposure, right? When you get exposure, there is a element of attentiveness as well, right?
okay,
Even though you're exposed to, like you said, your sister and everybody else, you all had access
we did though.
to the bell. You expose yourself to it, and you were attentive enough to pay attention to what different
Settings.
music pieces were
Yep.
were on there. So yeah, that's interesting. That's interesting.
Yeah, so I haven't told that story in a while as it relates to I've gotten so many other things to add on, so many different elements. I
Yeah,
gotta return to that, because I think it was a good illustration
yeah, that's
to
a great
young
image.
people like, hey, it's everybody has the availability. Well, everyone should have access and exposure, but then to your point, everybody has to be attentive to it.
Yeah,
So
that's correct.
the
And
the
I don't want to miss this point either. I just want to say that we also have to come back to you singing a tune as well. You gave us a little light dusting of it, but I
yeah,
just
I
want a
did though. I just
yeah, a full version,
and that's a whole nother session.
Yeah, yeah,
But check it though. So we've gotten into this thing about what it is that you hate. That's how I'm gonna flip it back on you. It's all about you, Woody. It's not about me right now.
yeah.
So we've gotten into what it is that you dislike, right? And so that's a broken system. That's a broken socioeconomic system that you experienced as a youth. seeing your dad who had this mentality to hustle, who had this mentality to work, who had this mentality to build, but because of access or being denied accessibility due to, I'm just going to assume race, right? He wasn't afforded the ability to expand his business in the way that it should so that it could thrive and be as successful as it could be in Detroit, Michigan. And so once we identify the thing that's broken in the world, the thing that's broken in our community, the thing that impacts us to the point where as an adult, we're like, I can't stand to see that. The next question becomes, well, what do you have in your hand? What do you possess as a tool to fix what's broken? And that gets to the next part of the equation, which is talent. Like our talent is the tool that we have to then address the thing that's broken and begin to fix it. And so my question to you now becomes, well, what is your tool? What is your talent, Woody?
Yeah, I think similar to you, I was very attentive in mathematics and analysis and analytical approach to thinking, the system thinking. I also possess creativity and solution oriented as well. But mathematics and analytics is something that I've kind of think that is my talent. And what I mean by that, and those are just kind of words to describe a scientific approach or a tool to solve problems, right? Through data and data points. But it is also, I go back to what we talked about earlier, is the why, right? Why are these things so important? And I think that my talent is the ability to take very complex problems and find not only mathematical solutions, but practical solutions to those things as well.
Yeah. Man, I tell my kids all the time, tell me how, I tell my children all the time when they were younger, and my son is starting to get it now. I was like, I love math because you can address a problem from different angles and come to the same conclusion. But I'm like, don't overcomplicate it though. Make it simple. Like make it as simple to yourself as possible so that you can explain it to yourself later on. You can explain it to your teacher. You can explain it to somebody else. Find the simplest approach. And if you've been around math long enough, that there's several approaches to a solution, and do the thing that's the simplest, like the least steps. I was like, just make it as easy for yourself as possible. And of course, somebody may say easy in math, that's an oxymoron, but it's up to people like us to close the gap. And that's what I see you as. I see you as someone who closes the gap by presenting the simple solution. Like, hey, this is a complex system that we're talking about. When you mention socioeconomic, you're talking about two constructs that come together in their own complexities and then create new complexities. And someone like you has the ability to navigate this information because you said you analyze data points, and you can talk to both sides of the equation and say, hey, look, for the people who are in the minority, this is why it's important to know this system, because they're gonna react like those third, fourth, and fifth graders. I don't care about the economy. I don't care about X, Y, and Z. And you're one who's gonna come along and say, here's why you should, from a perspective that becomes tangible. Here's how it's impacting you directly. It's not just abstract, right? And then from the perspective of the majority, you can say, hey, look, the system is lagging. The system has this overhead because more and more of people, more and more of this minority group, and I don't mean minority by race or whatever, but I mean minority by the people who are being marginalized, which, if we're honest, in this country, sometimes it's marginalization is by race, but we're not gonna go there. But hey, look, until we begin to equip more and more of the minority to function within where the majority are, the system is going to continue to have this overhead, and it's going to break. It is breaking. And I see you as the person, you don't necessarily get the two to talk, you don't get the minority to talk to the majority, but you close this gap by giving information that's relevant to the minority and that's relevant to the majority. And in doing so, you're building a bridge to help mend this system. And that's what Genius is all about.
Yeah. You mentioned kind of Albert Einstein earlier on, and one of the quotes. There's many quotes from Albert Einstein, but he took the approach of sharing and caring for others around his approach to education or his approach to solving problems.
He really
And
did.
the one thing is that a lot of folks, I use the word, I don't want to say sacrifice, but giving up, right? Albert Einstein, and we categorize him as this academic genius or this genius, but what he did is he was willing to spend more time on a problem than anyone else was willing to spend.
True.
Right, at the end of the day, it's not the fact that he got it right away. It's kind of your same story with the doorbell. He's attentive enough to say that, hey, there's a problem, and I'm going to stick with it until that problem is solved.
Yeah.
Right. Some type of solution or something that gets me closer to a apex or a perfect solution. And I think many of us think about, like with mine access or the wealth gap or whatever it may be, we see the problem and we're going to stick with it, right? And we're going to make dents and chip away at those challenges and opportunities until it makes sense for not only us but for others, right? Yeah.
I forgot what he called them, but he would get into he was a visual person. He called them something like mind. The only thing that's coming to mind right now is mind maps, but I know that's not what he called them. But he had these thought experiments. That's what it was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
He would have these thought experiments where he would just delve into these pieces. And Tesla was like this too. They would literally see these pieces, these gears functioning, and they would bring this together in their minds and then begin to find these solutions. They almost would be discovering or would be revealed to them.
Yeah.
And that's just how their minds were designed. And so, nothing discrediting that. That's amazing. But there are other mindsets that are out there in the world that do similar things, but not in the same field. And that's all I'm trying to do is just get people to see where their field is, where their lane is, and understand. Because as we get to the last part of the equation, your purpose in life is very simple. It's to identify your talent and then apply it to your passion. Right. And it's like putting a puzzle together. Once you put these puzzles together, which, if you ever put a puzzle together, you don't get it right the first time. And it's okay. That's the thing that I think a lot of people don't have this endurance with math, because they're like, man, I want to get it right the first time. And when I don't, I'm ready to throw my hands up. But it's like, no, keep at it though. Like, yeah, math may be abstract, but when we're talking about putting together your destiny, your uncommon destiny, you got to be comfortable with failure. You got to be comfortable with, hey, this didn't work right the first time, but I'm going to go back at it again. This talent, maybe I have multiple talents, maybe I have multiple passions, and I just put them together wrong, and just keep kind of coming at it from different angles, like we talked about with math, until the simple solution presents itself. And I guarantee people that it will.
Yeah.
Right. Because, your passion is not going to go away. Your talent, you may not use it for a while, but I like the fact that you talked about your father, because talent is generational. Talent doesn't just come out of nowhere. We discover it and it feels like it came out of nowhere, but most of the time it's handed down generationally from our parents. And when we have more resources, more access, more exposure, the talent becomes a little clearer to us. And so I see your father's talent in you. Before we even got on the conversation, I hope you don't mind me bringing this up, but you're like, hey, I got another session today. I'm about to talk to 5 young entrepreneurs, and help them kind of navigate, what is the steps to becoming functional, to bringing this small business into a platform, into a market that's going to be viable, right? And so that's the ability, that's a hustle mentality right there. Like, you don't have to, give your time to these young entrepreneurs. And it sounds like it's something that you've been doing for a while. You was like, hey, look, wherever I plant my feet for whatever season I'm in, I get into a mentoring program. I get into a mentoring mode. I get into a mentoring phase where I find those who have a need, that have a gap, and I try to fill that. That's what I see in you. And so that's a strong talent to be able to lend to others. If there are stories that talk about talents being lent, and it's not until a talent is lent and given away that it can have the opportunity to multiply. And Genius is very much about that. If I let my light shine, it gives you permission to let your light shine too. And then if we just keep on touching and keep on shining, we're going to have that light begin to perpetuate into all of our surrounding community, and it'll just go on beyond the 7 degrees of separation, where we won't even the thing that we started will be so much further beyond us that we won't even know the impact that it has. But it's beginning to address the brokenness of the world from a community level because we're sharing what it is that we have.
It only takes one person to help motivate, inspire, you know, exponentially, right? Me talking, 7 degrees of separation, me talking to, 10 people in a week, those 10 people can ultimately, and they get it and grasp it, those 10 people can share it with 10 more people and just have accelerated expansion of knowledge, potential wisdom, expertise as well, or, potentially changing the course of somebody's life, after that. We have more power than we give ourselves credit for.
That's it. That's it right there. That's the whole point. You perfectly encapsulated the message that I'm trying to bring. We have more power than we give ourselves credit for. That's it in a nutshell. And speaking in a nutshell, this is very much like planting seeds, right? When you go into agriculture and you plant seeds, it's the tentativeness we have no control over when we disseminate information, right? Like I did this 3 weeks ago at Elgin High School virtually. And for the first time ever, done this thing, I've been doing this workshop for a decade. For the first time ever, when I asked at the beginning of the class who considered themselves to be a genius, and nobody raised their hand. And when I asked at the end, nobody raised their hand. That's never happened before. Wow. But that's not on me at that point. Their tentativeness to pick up what I was putting down is on them. The onus now, the responsibility now has shifted from me to them, and I can't control that. And that's how it is when you plant seeds into the ground. You can't control how many of these seeds are gonna germinate, but all you can do is keep planting.
That's correct.
Right?
Yeah. Every farmer has a bad batch of, I would not calling people bad batches, but there's bad batches of crops, right? And you continue to plant until your crops, you
get the yield you want.
Permeate, and yield, and grow. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I told them, I was like, hey, you know what? Thank y'all for being honest, but at the end of the day, you can't deny that a seed was just planted on the inside of you. And so I was happy. I was like, hey man, I did my part. All I can do is present you the information and not hold it against them, like, man, or think that it was a failure. No, even if it was a failure, what opportunity do I have to learn from it?
Well, I wouldn't say, it's kind of funny is that sorry, I have this weather is changing. We're like 55 degrees today, which 2 days ago was like 30. So my
this gets
my sinuses are all over the place. So I do apologize. So, just because you plant a seed or share wisdom or share some knowledge or expertise or examples, the growth doesn't happen within an hour. The growth doesn't happen within 8 hours. The growth doesn't happen within a day or 2 days. Sometimes it takes a full season, a full year for those things to kind of resonate and to grow. I remember, we were talking about mentoring. I'm more than happy to give up my time and give my time to others. And the reason why I'm always open to that is because somebody took the time for me. And it is unfair for me not to give my time when others have generously given their time and share their knowledge. The one caveat is that you always have to ask, right? I don't share information freely and boast and go on a speaking circuit to kind of get a message out. But if asked, right, I am more than happy to share what I know, what I've been through, and where I think things may be going. Yeah.
And it's, that's generosity, right? And so as we kind of come to a close, I just want to thank you for your generosity and time. Thank you for taking the time with me, for taking the time with these young men that you're going to meet with. And just know that this harvest that we are talking about is going to return to you in multiple ways. It's going to return to you in ways that you couldn't even have imagined, because you're not doing it for the purpose of getting something in return. And the heart of why you do what you do and how you do it is what's going to guarantee that your harvest is plentiful, that your family is blessed, that your family is protected. Both the family that you have and the family that you came from are going to be elevated and successful because of the work that you're putting in, because of the seeds that you're sowing. And so I just wanted to make sure that you know that. I
Yeah,
see
thank
it
you.
clear as day. And again, man, Woody, thanks for your time. It was good catching up with you.
Reggie, same here. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us for this week's episode. Make sure you pick up the book, Common Genius, Uncommon Destiny, by my dad, Reggie Legend, available on Amazon and at inkwellspoken.com. Connect with us at Inkwellspoken on all social media platforms. If you enjoy our content, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload.